Hi everyone! First, I want to show you a short video before we start. As all of you just have seen, the Cambodian boy in the video could speak at least two languages. I'm sure at least some of us here are bilinguals either. This is not unusual. According to research by famous psycholinguist Grosjean, more than half of the world's population is bilingual, and many people are regularly being exposed in a multilingual environment. Quite interesting and shocking, isn't it? It seems like living in an environment where different languages integrate with each other is an essential part of human development. In this regard, what's the role of this immersion in human development, especially for children under 6 years old? Basically, there are two things that children can benefit from just being exposed to a diverse linguistic environment. The first thing is learning language. The second benefit is for perspective taking. Basically, perspective taking is the ability to look beyond your own point of view so that you can consider how someone else may think or feel about something. Do you think that's all? No, scientists don't stop here, they go beyond. Basically, they're thinking that the perspective taking benefit may serve as a social cognitive tool, which may facilitate effective communication for children. They proposed a hypothesis that exposing young children to diverse linguistic environment will set a foundation for effective communication. Being a bilingual itself offers some cognitive benefits like executive functioning, which is a set of skills that we use to learn, work, and manage life. Scientists think that the effective communication is not resulted from the cognitive benefits of being a bilingual. Rather, being immersed in a diverse linguistic environment offers unique social cognitive tools for effective communication. Now we have the primary idea. Exposure to a multilingual environment promote effective communication for children. What's the next step? Well, it's definitely experiment. So first, researchers recruited three language groups of children, monolingual, exposure, and bilingual to the experiment. Now we're at the most exciting part of the experiment, the specific procedure. Can you guys see the picture? Great! This is a social communication task that requires children to take the other people's perspective. You notice any differences? Right. If you watch carefully, there are four grid squares being occluded from the director point of view so that only child can see this. One important part in the experiment is the critical test. The director will ask child to move mutually visible object or a distractor object that is only visible from the children's perspective. In order to succeed in the critical test instruction, the child should move the mutually visible target rather than the distractor. I can give you guys a simple example. In this picture, the critical instruction given by the director to the child would be, I see a small car. Can you move the small car under the spoon? Which object would you choose? Right. Since the director is saying that she can see the car, so the child should move the smallest target car that both the director and the child can see. Well, we get to the final part, the result. Quite exciting. I will go over the most basic result so you guys can get a brief understanding of the experiment. Well, the most important thing we'll look at is the children's performance on critical trials. As you can see from the picture, both exposure and bilingual groups outperform the monolingual group on critical trials, which means they are better able to regularly take the director's perspective. However, there were no difference between the exposure and bilingual group. There are some other results coming from the sub-experiments in which generally exposure and bilingual groups are more able to look first at the distractor and finally move the target, and they make fewer egocentric looks at the distractor. From the picture above, you can see that children in the exposure and bilingual groups are more able to sense the perspective of the director in comparison to that of the monolingual group. How do we know that being a bilingual itself is not the reason for effective communication? Well, from those sub-experiments, monolingual group performed the same as the exposure group in the cognitive tasks, which demonstrate that executive functioning can't be accounted for difference in communication abilities. To conclude the experiment, the exposure group was as successful as the bilingual group at the social communication task, despite having lower executive functioning scores. Thus, this tells us that cognitive differences can't apply to hypotheses that exposure in bilingual group outperform the monolingual group at social perspective taking. Well, this experiment is especially important for parents. It is demonstrated by science that just exposure to a diverse linguistic environment facilitates children's communication. Therefore, why don't you let your kids to another language from the beginning? I do think many children reading book may not mention this, but from a developmental psychology perspective, a bilingual child will definitely communicate better than a monolingual child. Even though they are just in that environment, it still helps as the research demonstrates. There is nothing bad learning new languages, as they can not only gain knowledge, but also maintain an effective communication. Who else don't want their children to be better able to stand in other people's perspective and talk and think? So put them in a multilingual environment and let them grow is one of the best ways to rear them. People here who don't have young kids, don't be worried. It doesn't mean that it only applies to young children, but scientists still need further research to examine it. Still, no matter how old you are, as an adolescent, as a middle-aged person, as an old person, I still encourage you and people you may know to learn another language. You may be old enough to possess the perspective-taking ability, but who can guarantee that they won't misunderstand others? The world is developing at an unprecedented pace, and more people are speaking more than one language. Even if there isn't any obvious advantages except for young children, keeping up with the trend will definitely help you in many other ways. Maybe next time I present the newest research, you guys can at least know some phrases of another language. So, why don't we just make this move starting from tomorrow? 谢谢大家，Merci beaucoup and thank you.